Welcome to Steppin' Out of Babylon, produced by Supriano. Babylon is everywhere. It's the isms and schisms both in the system and within ourselves. Let's unify, stand aligned, and step out of Babylon. Hi, everybody. My name's Sue Supriano, and I'm really excited today to be speaking with Mike Ruppert. Haven't seen you for a while, Mike, and a lot has been going on. Welcome.
Thank you, Sue. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, we've been doing interviews since 9/11, and you had brought so much information about that. And, of course, you wrote the book, Crossing the Rubicon, The Decline of the American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil. Just came out. It was about to come out, I think, last time that we spoke. And I want to let people know that your website is fromthewilderness.com. And there you can get all kinds of what I think is cutting-edge information. And you have quite a following, and it's well-deserved because you certainly put yourself out on the front lines there and educated many of us about the depths of the cover-ups and corruption and how things really, really work in terms of money and power and drugs and 9/11 and just a lot of things. We are here at Soulfest, actually, in Hopland, California. Some people know it as Real Goods, the Solar Living Institute. It's a big festival. So you've been talking about sustainability. And I just want to ask you right off the bat, I think you made some statement that was really pressing some people's buttons about 9/11 was over. You weren't going to deal with that anymore. And since you've been such a leader in exposing and making people really question and get to know about 9/11 being an inside job, I wonder why you said that.
Well, 9/11 isn't over. It will never be over any more than any of the great tragedies of American or world history will ever be over. Slavery isn't over. Many of the great crimes of this country are not over. In terms, however, of having even a remotely viable window for pursuing 9/11 in the court of political justice, 9/11 is over. We, of course, saw George Bush and Dick Cheney steal the 2000 election. We saw them again steal the 2004 election with proprietary software that can't be controlled or audited. The media has declared it dead. The so-called independent commission, the Kane Commission, closed out its report, which was just an abysmal pack of lies and a horrible insult to the American people's intelligence. The major media has passed by 9/11. In other words, all of the available windows to pursue anything with 9/11 activism are really closed on the public venue. I am the ultimate pragmatist. I measure my success as an activist or a writer or an author in terms of changes in the political landscape. Whatever window existed to pursue 9/11 closed when the Kane Commission report closed it out. When the major media declared it was over, it had been resolved, looked at, it was time to move on. I very much, and this really has to do, it's a great corollary with the whole issue of peak oil, energy invested versus energy returned. And what I concluded, it was very clear to me early on this year in 2005 and the end of 2004, actually, that no matter what kind of energy was expended, we were not going to get 9/11 into a political venue where we would see either an impeachment or we would see an open political trial, any kind of hearing in Congress. All the congressional hearings are over. So that's why I said it was over. And I still believe that, because now we are facing very dangerous threats from both peak oil, which is now pretty much out of the closet and openly acknowledged, and climate collapse, which is happening. And these are life-threatening issues. As a policeman, I was concerned about saving lives in real time. Don't tell me about what ifs, what might be. I got to know what I can do right now.
Yeah, well, I can certainly relate to that. And it was from you that I first heard about peak. And you've been talking about it for a while, and you're oh so right. Well, I mean, we talk about the things that people don't want to hear about very often. Although I have noticed that it seems in my travels and talking to people that there's a lot more people who don't flinch and get all upset when I just happen to mention 9/11 was an inside job, or don't talk about those terrorists from over there. It's,
Right.
that's not the real deal. So it seems to me like a lot more people are not all freaked out about that idea. Not that they're doing anything, or not that they think they can do anything or whatever, but I wonder what's your experience, Mike Ruppert? I find a lot more people have accepted that possibility, even though they're not being active about it or anything. Doesn't shock them anymore.
Oh yeah, no, I'm definitely seeing that, and I certainly see that reflected in where I'm being asked to speak. Now I'm getting some major speaking invitations to major universities around the world. Pending, we have Georgetown, University of Colorado, we have UC San Diego. We've been asked to speak at, of course, the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. I've just been asked to speak at the Royal Society of Literature and History in Dublin, Ireland. Mm-hmm. So these things, people do tend to accept because psychologically, of course, as time passes from the event, it's easier to accept these contrarian theories. But again, so I'm still this pragmatist guy out there. I want to save lives. I want to teach people about what the immediate threats are. So I kind of say, well, people are saying, yeah, Mike, you were right. And well, I knew I was right, but so what? But now, how do we save more people's lives now? Because there is a direct connection between 9/11 and peak oil. And ultimately, I guess you can say this climate collapse that is now becoming also the elephant that you can no longer deny is standing in the middle of your living room.
Mm-hmm. We'll say more about that. And I just want to say that, of course, people can get your book, Crossing the Rubicon, The Decline of the American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil. And I must say that I see people all over the place reading it. It's such a big, fat book. And so that's wonderful. And it's done well.
We sold about 100,000 copies, which makes Rubicon the second largest selling book about the attacks of 9/11 after the Kane Commission report. And it was just funny because a good friend of mine, Barry Zwicker in Canada, who's a great journalist in Canada, was writing a series for the Toronto Star. And he said, well, what mainstream publications have reviewed your book? And I said, none. And he said, why? And I said, because they cannot refute the research. I have 1,000 footnotes in the book. And so the only tactic the major press has had available to suppress my book is to just pretend as if it didn't exist. And in a way, that's kind of worked to our benefit, I think.
Well, I was just looking at the last chapter, actually, and where you're talking about oil as well, and maybe in other parts of the book, but we were both talking about peak oil and climate change. And you just said that 9/11 was related to peak oil for sure, and maybe to climate change. So if you would expand.
Well, peak oil was clearly the motive for the U.S. government to have facilitated and orchestrated the attacks of 9/11. It gave the U.S. government the rationale to invade Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iraq, which has the second largest reserves on the planet, to surround literally Saudi Arabia and Iran, both major and very significant producers. 60% of all the recoverable oil on the planet is in the Middle East. And in Crossing the Rubicon, we showed clearly from historical records that Dick Cheney and especially the National Energy Policy Development Group, his task force that was the ultra-secret task force that ran from January of 2001 through May of 2001, that's, in my opinion, and I still believe it to be the case, is where the deepest, darkest secrets of 9/11 are buried. That's where the oil majors and the oil producers and the major economists got together in a room and said, look, peak oil is here. We can't get away from it. The oil that is left is in the Middle East. How do we get to a place where we can go seize that oil? And look at that. And, of course, now we're awash in rumors and threats of war about an invasion of Iran. And I, for one, do not think that the world will permit, and I do not think we will invade Iran, simply because the rest of the world cannot do without Iranian oil. There's no place else to go. For several months now, this is late August of 2005, world oil demand has exceeded oil production. So it's very possible that we are at peak or past the peak now. We won't know for sure until maybe a year, 2 years after.
Isn't that what it means, what you just described? Isn't that what peak oil means, when demand exceeds supply?
Well, it's when you have used half of all the oil that's there. All oil production always follows a bell curve. And when you've used half, you're at the peak. And once you go down the peak, no matter how much money, no matter how much technology, no matter how much wishful thinking takes place, you will never be able to produce more oil. Every year you will look at diminishing production, but of course that happens now as world demand for oil is still exploding. China, of course, is a voracious consumer, but still far less than the U.S. So if we're over peak, we are now faced with a situation really where the world is faced with the crisis of overpopulation, 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food. We use oil to transport strawberries from Chile to Los Angeles, lettuce from, ridiculous, stupid use of oil to transport food in this model of globalization. And globalization is dead, period. It's over. It cannot be sustained because 70% of the world's transportation is powered by oil. 95% of American transportation is powered by oil. So now, with climate collapse upon us, with economic collapse, I think very clear. I'm very strongly predicting a major economic collapse in this country at the end of 2005. We will see everybody discovering what many activists like myself, Richard Heinberg, Julian Darley, Colin Campbell, all of us who have talked about it for so long, realizing that survival will now become a matter of locality. Everything is going to be local. Where you live. Food production will have to be local. Economics will have to be local. You're going to have to learn how to work with your neighbors. You're going to have to learn how to grow food in your backyard or close by because the oil won't be there to move it around. So that's the big push right now. That's the sense for urgency. And what's apparent to me is that the U.S. government is very much aware of this, and the U.S. government will actually aid in the collapse of the U.S. economy this year and encourage it. The reason I say that is because we have groups like the Bilderbergers and the Council on Foreign Relations now actively talking about demand destruction, which is a euphemism for economic collapse. The way you destroy demand is you throw tens of millions of people out of work. People who are unemployed don't buy gasoline, don't drive cars, don't take vacations, don't fly on airplanes, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, that's interesting. I always wondered how they could keep on growing, and think, who's going to buy this if people didn't have jobs.
Right.
So you think they kind of had that in mind?
Absolutely. Well, there's also the other thing is that the real financial elites in the United States, their money is no longer in this country. They have no vested interest. I mean, people who think that the Great Depression of the 1930s was cost the rich people anything are out of their mind. That didn't cost the rich. That was a wealth transfer. If you look at America, we're absolutely oversaturated and up to our eyeballs in debt with consumer goods. We've mortgaged our houses 2 and 3 times. The housing bubble's ready to collapse. Whereas in the rest of the developing world, and people in China and Malaysia and other people, you have people who don't have any of the, or very few of the consumer goods that we have, and that's a fresh market. So the elites of the world can go to sell for them for as long as that oil lasts to keep their paradigm going. But of course, we are literally standing in a pool of gasoline. This is because we soon may be having a nuclear conflict over oil reserves, which would make it all moot, of course, if we blow ourselves to smithereens to fight over oil.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. And I've been reading a bit about China and from the Wilderness News that comes to me on my computer. So having a bit of an idea, but would you talk about how you see the geopolitical shifts?
Very clearly, the world is aligning against the United States, and the United States is, as I said in Rubicon, an empire entering decline. We are becoming a toothless tiger. Recently, we have had a number of strong declarations from Russia, China, India about the U.S. getting out of Central Asia, removing our bases there. We have China and Iran forming economic alliances all over West Africa, which is a critical oil-producing region. And probably the best example, or the clearest one to understand, is President Hugo Chavez